Hey guys, tonight we're diving into the grimy world of medieval hygiene, specifically the gross, weird, and often unbelievable habits of women during a time when soap was suspect and bathing might get you excommunicated. Picture it, you're padding barefoot through a stone castle corridor in the dead of night, chamber pot sloshing in your hands trying not to spill anything down your single woolen gown, because you definitely don't have a change of clothes. You probably won't survive this. Honestly, most people back then didn't. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And I'd love to know, where are you listening from? And what time is it where you are? Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You've woken up in the pitch-dark, icy chill of a medieval winter night. Nature's calling. There's no bathroom, of course, no plumbing, no flushing, just you and the chamber pot under your straw mattress. You fumble for it in the dark, careful not to knock it over. The handle's sticky. Not from anything recent, just the residue of 100 nights like this. You squat low, knees aching, praying you don't tip it. Here's the thing, once you've done your business, what now? If you're in a castle, you might be lucky enough to have a guardrobe, a primitive toilet that's really just a stone hole leading to a vertical shaft that dumps straight down the outer wall, with no drainage system that waste seeps along the castle stones or collects in cesspits below. If you're a peasant woman, you're probably dumping your pot in the ditch behind your home or, let's be real, out the window. People shouted "Gardez low, watch out for the water" before tossing waste into the street. That's the origin of the word loo, by the way. A little trivia before bed. So yes, in medieval towns, the cobbled streets were rivers of runoff, animal dung, spoiled food, and human waste all swirling into open gutters. You had to be strategic with your footsteps. And if you slipped, well, that's a whole other kind of historical trauma. Now imagine that same woman walking to market at sunrise, lifting her hem to avoid puddles she hopes are just rainwater. The hem's already crusted with filth anyway. Skirts acted like moving mops. And no, they weren't washed daily, often not even monthly. But we'll get to that in section 2. Back to your nighttime business. Once that pot's full, or full enough, you'll need to empty it. You might do it first thing in the morning, or if it's summer and the smell is unbearable, maybe right away. There's no designated waste zone. Just pick a spot behind the stable by the pig pen, or directly onto the compost heap if your village even has one. Historians still argue whether some towns had early sanitation patrols who enforced waste disposal rules. There's evidence of ordinances against dumping in wells or near market stalls, but enforcement spotty at best. Even monasteries and nunneries, places you'd think had rules about cleanliness, had their share of trouble. Archaeological digs of abbey grounds have turned up cesspits disturbingly close to food prep areas. You don't want to imagine the cross-contamination, but now you are. Sorry. As for smells, ever wonder what medieval streets actually smelled like? The answer is like a battlefield between compost and corpse. Urban women might carry scented sachets called pomanders on their belts to mask the worst of it. But most rural women, they just got used to it. That's the scary part. Your nose acclimates. And here's the fringe fact. You didn't ask for some wealthier women kept tiny lapdogs, not for affection, but to sniff. These pups often perfumed themselves, were used like portable air fresheners. You'd bury your face in their fur whenever something like a puddle of warm waste assaulted your nostrils. Comforting and disgusting all at once. Now let's get personal. The chamber pot isn't just a toilet. It's a silent witness to all your intestinal moods. And those were complicated. Medieval diets weren't exactly fiber-balanced. Grains, cheese, and wine dominate. That means constipation followed by sudden non-constipation. No wonder the average woman's pot contents weren't exactly easy to clean out. But clean it out you must. If you're lucky, your home is near a stream. Not for drinking, of course, dear God, no. Streams doubled as washing zones. That's where your chamber pot gets rinsed and where your neighbors do the same. You wave politely as you both swirl brown-stained clay pots in the water. Sanitation was a collective shrug. By the way, many homes didn't even have separate chamber pots. One pot served multiple people, mother children, maybe even your elderly father. You just took turns. And yes, there were accidents. The smell was a permanent fixture, a background note to every meal. For wealthier women, there were close stools, early toilet chairs with a built-in pot beneath. Sounds fancy, but don't be fooled. These were often lined with straw or hay, which trapped smells and turned into compost, eventually. But not before fermenting under your sitting room chair for a few weeks. One historical record tells of a noblewoman in Burgundy who had her own personal stool servant, whose only job was to clean and empty her pot daily. Historians still argue whether this was common or an extreme case of privilege, but either way, it proves one thing: if you could afford to outsource your filth, you did. And now, as you settle back into your straw mattress, pot slid carefully back under your bed, you roll onto your side, hoping the rats don't knock it over in the night. Yes, that happened too. Rats were everywhere. You're not getting back to sleep, are you? Morning comes too soon, and with it the scratchy rub of wool against your skin as you rise, stretch, and yawn. You're still in the same dress you slept in because, well, you only own one. Maybe two if you're lucky or well off. But even then, why waste good fabric washing clothes when soap is a precious commodity? And water might not even be clean. You smooth your skirt, brushing off flecks of straw crumbs, and something suspiciously sticky that you're not ready to identify before breakfast. Your kirtle, a long, thick overdress, is heavy with days, weeks, or even months of accumulated sweat food stains, soot, and whatever happened to land on you during your daily errands. You scratch at your shoulder. Is that dried egg? Probably. Hopefully. Medieval women didn't change their clothes daily or weekly. In fact, some high-status ladies prided themselves on never washing their gowns like ever, because washing was considered a job for the lower classes. There's an actual documented case of Queen Isabella of Valois owning a white gown she refused to launder, claiming it was unfit to be wet. That's a powerful combination of wealth and willful ignorance. And you're trudging through town in something that's taken on a life and smell of its own. Let's talk laundry. You think you hate doing it now? Imagine scrubbing heavy linen in freezing water with lye soap that burns your skin. Soap was homemade, yes, but not like the Pinterest kind. We're talking a chunky mixture of animal fat and wood ash, and if you weren't careful, it could strip the color from your dress or your fingers. Your washing machine was a stone by the river and a wooden paddle. And those dresses wool, mostly, which means they were thick, absorbent, and nearly impossible to dry without turning stiff or moldy. So if you washed one, you couldn't wear it for days. Hence, you just didn't wash it at all. Instead, women relied on something called the layered filth technique. Stay with me. The outermost garments, the surcoats and gowns, acted as dirt shields. Underneath a shift or chemise absorbed the sweat and body grime. That layer might get rinsed occasionally, but not with any regularity you'd recognize. If it turned yellow, natural bleaching. If it stiffened, bonus insulation for winter. Historians still argue whether some women layered linen shifts on purpose to extend time between washings, or if it was just fashion meets function. Either way, that base layer bore the brunt, and it wasn't spared either. In tight quarters where open fires belched soot and animals walked freely through your living space, even clean clothes got dirty fast. Here's a fun side note. Sumptuary laws in some regions actually limited what fabrics women could wear based on their social class. So even if you wanted breathable linen or silks that didn't trap filth like wool, you might be forbidden by law. Talk about a dirty catch-22. You grab your cloak for the day. It smells like smoke and onions and your child's vomit from 3 days ago. You shrug it on anyway, it's too cold not to. No time to scrub it. You just pray for rain. The idea of clean was relative. There's evidence that some women freshened up their clothes by brushing them with stiff bristles or shaking them outside to remove dust. Perfumed sachets were pinned into folds to cover the smell, but not eliminate it. The stench wasn't a problem, it was expected. Everyone stank. In fact, the cleaner you smelled, the more suspicious people were of your morals. Baths were at times associated with sinful vanity or promiscuity. A strong scent of rosewater might mean you'd just emerged from a scandalous public bathhouse visit. Better to smell like a barn than risk your reputation. This brings us to a fascinating fringe habit, dry cleaning via smoke. Women sometimes hung their dresses over herbal fires to mask odors and, as they believed, purify them. Imagine a thick wool gown absorbing a mix of thyme, lavender, and wood smoke. Did it kill bacteria? No. Did it make you sneeze less around your own body? Maybe. It was something. And yet these same women were expected to look presentable. That meant no visible tears in your dress, no sagging seams, and your hair, however oily, neatly covered. Your appearance was tied to your virtue. Cleanliness, not so much, which is why nobles invested in elaborate brooches, embroidered trim, and rich colors, to distract from the grime. Dirt in style is still dirt, but at least it's dignified dirt. Let's pause for a joke. What's the medieval version of dry shampoo? A hat. There was a lot of hat wearing. Veils, wimples, coifs, all kept the hair hidden and the scalp grime out of sight. We'll cover what was going on under those veils in the next section. Spoiler, it involves fat and soot, but for now, just know that keeping the clothes clean wasn't a thing. At best, they were kept together. Even noble women needed maidservants to help maintain the illusion of tidiness. These maids beat the gowns with sticks, aired them on hedges, and occasionally mended tears with visible, brightly colored patches that almost dared people to stare. There are records of women stitching gold thread onto reeky bodices like trying to polish a very large, very smelly turd. And if you're wondering about underpants, don't. That's a whole thing we'll dive into later. But let's just say even more reason to keep your outer layers as clean as possible, because there was nothing underneath to absorb the mess. As you make your way to market, one foot in front of the other, you feel the stiffness of your gown dragging at your legs. The lower hem is visibly darkened from yesterday's walk. You consider lifting it to save it from more grime, but what's the point? It's been baptized by worse. The woman ahead of you drops a jug of fish brine on the path. It splashes your skirt. You sigh, then keep walking. No reaction needed, it'll blend in. Your mouth is dry. Not just from the stale morning air drifting through your poorly sealed window, but because you've just woken up in a world where brushing your teeth isn't a thing and probably never will be. You shift your tongue around, trying to dislodge whatever's clinging to your molars. Feels like leftover barley. Maybe yesterday's leaks. Could be something worse. You reach for your toothpick, a sharpened stick, or maybe a splinter of bone if you're lucky. You poke at your gums with it, careful not to press too hard, because that could cause bleeding, and surprise, no one's quite sure what causes infections. But they do happen, a lot. Medieval women didn't brush their teeth, not in any modern sense. Sure, there were basic methods of scraping and rinsing. Some chewed on mint sage or even ashes mixed with salt to refresh the mouth. But it was more about masking smell than hygiene. You might swish a bit of vinegar to ward off decay, at least until your enamel surrenders. And speaking of decay, let's talk about those weird little creatures medieval people believed were hiding in your molars. Tooth worms. Yes, actual worms. If you've got a throbbing pain in the back of your mouth, that's not a cavity, sweetheart. That's a worm chewing its way through your nerves. You can't see it, but you know it's there. You feel it. And the cure? Well, it depends on which wise woman you ask. One might prescribe smoking the mouth with burning henbane or fennel, trying to smoke out the invisible worm. Another might dab your gums with oil of clove, shockingly useful, actually. Others, they'll tell you to hold roasted onion slices in your mouth while chanting a prayer to Saint Apollonia, patron saint of dental agony. Her own teeth were supposedly yanked out during martyrdom, so she's relatable. You lean over your basin rinse with tepid water that probably came from a bucket last used for laundry and try to smile. But your teeth are already yellowed, maybe even chipped. If you're older than 30, you've probably lost a few. And if you're rich, your sweet tooth may have already betrayed you. Sugar was a luxury, yes, but also a poison. Medieval noblewomen prized candied violets, preserved fruits, and honey-drenched pastries, all delightful, all deadly to your enamel. Now here's a curious fringe fact. Medieval women believed the breath carried your inner essence. So halitosis wasn't just unpleasant, it was moral failure. A rotting mouth meant a rotting soul. Some theologians argued that bad breath was a sign of sin or demonic possession. No pressure. So what did women do to freshen up? They made their own powders if they could afford the ingredients. Charcoal and crushed eggshells were common, yes, ground-up eggshells. Some even used powdered deer antlers, believing it strengthened their gums. In some regions, women chewed on branches of licorice root or mastic gum to keep their mouths fragrant. But let's be honest, most just accepted that their breath was going to knock over small livestock by mid-morning. Historians still argue whether oral hygiene was widely practiced among the peasantry or mostly a thing for the upper classes and monastic women. Monks and nuns, oddly enough, often had better teeth. Why fewer sweets, more ritual rinses, and access to herbal remedies? But even then, no toothbrushes. Nothing even close. You run your tongue along your gums again and wince. One swollen. There's probably an abscess brewing, but there's no dentist. The local barber might pull it out for you if you don't mind sitting in a wooden chair while he yanks with pliers, no anesthetic in sight. If you're lucky, he'll cauterize it afterward with a hot iron. You will scream loudly. Let's lighten things up with a quick joke. What did a medieval woman say when offered a toothbrush? Why, I already have one tooth. But don't worry. Even if your mouth's a disaster, you can still pray it away. Some women kept little prayer scrolls or charms tied around their wrists, calling on saints to ease their dental torment. Did it work? Well, if you believed hard enough, maybe. If not, you at least got a stylish wrist accessory. Let's not forget the water issue. Clean water wasn't a given, and bad water could rot your teeth even faster. So women often drank ale wine or diluted mead, anything but the brownish stream trickling past the pigs. Alcohol did help kill some bacteria, but the side effects weren't ideal. Chronic dehydration, early liver issues, and of course, even more dry mouth. Add that to your rotting gums and you're starting each day with what we now call death breath. But hey, at least you're not alone. Every woman around you is in the same boat, smiling politely with gaps and stains, trying to keep a straight face during prayer, despite the molar that's pulsating like a medieval drum solo. There's even a recorded fashion trend in some areas, where noble women filed their teeth into delicate points to appear more refined. Sounds elegant. Until you get a toothache and realize that neat little file job opened the door for even more decay. And don't forget the romantic implications. Kissing rare. Passionate courtship, or like exchanging letters and side-eyes across a marketplace. You'd probably rather sniff your perfumed dog again than lean in for a smooch with Sir Geoffrey and his molasses breath. Romance was written in poetry, not practiced over garlic-riddled mead. Before you wrap up your morning prep, you press a bit of dried mint to your tongue, more out of habit than hope, and pull your veil over your head. No one needs to see what's happening behind your lips today. You join the others on the road to Mass, feeling the familiar throbbing behind your left cheekbone. If Saint Apollonia's listening, maybe she'll take mercy on you this time. Or maybe the toothworm's just hungry again. You're sweating again. Not from exertion, though. Hauling a basket of root vegetables uphill is no picnic. But because it's midsummer, your wool dress is trapping every degree of body heat, and your hair. It's practically glued to your scalp. You pause under a tree for some relief, tugging at the linen wimple wrapped tight around your head. Underneath your scalp is slick, sticky, and kind of smells like duck fat, because that's probably what it is. Let's talk hair. In the medieval world, women's hair wasn't just a beauty symbol, it was a battleground. Your tresses were considered potent, even dangerous. Loose hair in public. In many places, that was a no-go, especially if you were married. Covered heads were the norm. You weren't just hiding your locks from curious stares. You were trying to keep them from collecting soot lice and whatever floated in the air when your neighbor emptied her chamber pot. But under those layers, a secret horror show. You shift the linen banding around your temples, already damp. The scarf, the coif, the veil 3 layers deep, and beneath them your hair is stiff with oil. Not the luxurious kind. Goose fat, pig lard, or if you're lucky, almond oil steeped with herbs. Medieval women believed oils protected hair from breakage and sun damage. That part's not so wild. But with no shampoo, that oil built up. Quickly, then came the soot, then the lice, then the scratching. And here's the kicker, bathing the hair, not a regular thing. In fact, wetting the head was controversial. Many believed getting your scalp wet too often could lead to fevers or brain chill. Yes, brain chill. That was a thing. So women just kept oiling, brushing, and praying they didn't smell too bad. Speaking of brushing, no cute bristle brushes here. You're using a boar hair brush if you're wealthy, or a carved wooden comb if you're not. And even that's a luxury. Some women just used their fingers. Combing was done vigorously, often outdoors, to let the lice fall where they may. Some families had designated combing spots near hedgerows where they'd pick through hair like grooming primates. Quirky fringe fact: there's a record of a woman in 14th century France who kept her good comb locked in a chest with religious relics because it had been blessed by a priest to prevent demonic lice infestations. You can't make this up. Now let's talk lice for a second, or an hour, because these little guys were a medieval rite of passage. Everyone had them. You, your kids, your mother-in-law. Removing them wasn't about total eradication that was impossible. It was about management. Lice combs were thin metal and painful. You'd comb, flick, squish, repeat. Some women boiled their combs in wine between uses. That's dedication. You settle on a rock, pull the comb from your satchel, and start pulling it through your hair strand by painstaking strand. The teeth catch on a tangle and yank. You wince. You swear quietly. The woman beside you does the same. It's a communal ritual, a bonding experience. Medieval girlhood wasn't about friendship bracelets. It was about comparing lice sizes and sharing vinegar rinses. Historians still argue whether some of the more extravagant hair recipes passed down in herbal manuscripts were ever actually used. One German text recommends mixing ashes, red wine, and the boiled guts of a fish to make a cleansing rinse. Did anyone really pour fermented fish sauce on their heads? We may never know, but it was written down. By now, your comb has picked out 3 full-grown lice, one of which is still twitching. You flick it into the dirt and keep going. A quick joke to distract you. What's worse than a bad hair day in medieval Europe? A shared bad hair day. To tame all this mess, women relied on elaborate braiding. Long hair wasn't usually worn loose, except in bed or under heavy veils. Braids helped reduce tangles and made combing less of a daily death march. A young unmarried girl might wear 2 long plaits down her back, while married women often coiled their braids into tight buns to fit beneath headdresses. Hair could be beautiful, but it could also itch, stink, and harbor fleas. And then there was color. Blondes were all the rage in certain courts, especially in Italy, where women went to hilarious and horrifying lengths to bleach their hair. One popular method involved applying a paste made of wood ash and lye, then sitting in the sun with their hair spread across a wide-brimmed hat to catch the rays. You'd sit there for hours, head sizzling, hoping for a golden glow and praying your hair didn't just fall out. Sometimes it did. You catch a glimpse of your reflection in a basin, hair dark with grease matted at the temples and flecked with white, either dust or lice eggs, or both. You sigh and tie it back again. Washing hair was a production. First, you needed water heated because no one dared pour cold water on their scalp, for fear of catching vapors or unleashing melancholia. Then you needed soap, and not just any soap. You needed hair soap, an herbal mix that wouldn't strip too much oil, but might kill lice and reduce itching. Rosemary, chamomile, nettle, if you could afford those herbs. If not hope and vinegar, hope and tongue, but drying. That was its own nightmare. There were no blow dryers, obviously, and walking around with wet hair invited ridicule, superstition, and sore throats. Some women literally sat near fires for hours, with their hair fanned out behind them, hoping to dry it before nightfall. And you had to dry it because damp hair meant moldy pillows. Yes, moldy. Straw bedding plus damp scalp equals fungal bouquet. The irony. Despite all this chaos, women still took pride in their hair. There are accounts of women weaving ribbon through their braids using small scented pomades to add shine, and even sprinkling powdered herbs onto their scalps to smell more fresh. Because even if the lice were winning, you could still look like you were in control. You finish the last braid pin it under your veil and rise. Your scalp still itches. It always itches. But for a moment under the weight of your wimple and cloak, you feel vaguely presentable. Then the neighbor's child hugs you from behind and nestles his dirty little face into your neck. You feel a wriggle. Great. Another louse just immigrated. You've been dreading this part of the day, not because it's particularly painful or even rare, but because it's just so exhausting. You wake up, stretch, and then you feel it. The damp heaviness, the ache in your lower back, the telltale stain already beginning to spread between your legs. Your monthly visitor has arrived. And in medieval Europe, that means you're entering what one nun once called a purgatory of rags. Menstruation wasn't just uncomfortable, it was mysterious, feared, and wildly misunderstood. You move slowly, wincing, trying not to let your hem brush the bench you're about to sit on. Because in this world, periods are more than an inconvenience. They're a problem spiritually, socially, and hygienically. First things first, no pads, no tampons, no menstrual cups. What you've got is a rag. Literally. A piece of old cloth, probably linen, maybe wool, if you're unlucky, folded several times and stuffed between your legs. It's held in place by tying it to a belt or simply wedging it where it needs to be. One wrong move and it slips. You're on high alert for stains all day. And you can't just swap it out every few hours because water's scarce, soap's expensive, and washing bloody cloth in public could raise eyebrows. So like everything else, the strategy is endurance. You endure the discomfort, the odor, and the paranoia. You sit carefully. You walk carefully. You breathe carefully. Here's a quirky fringe tidbit. Some women burn their used menstrual rags after each cycle to prevent witches or demons from using the blood in curses. Others believed menstrual blood had healing powers and might even be used in fertility charms. So your soiled linen might be seen as dangerous or sacred. Just depends on the village. You adjust your belt again. Still damp. Still heavy, and know you're not going to change it yet. Maybe tonight, if the fire's warm enough and no one's around to ask what you're boiling. Church rules don't make this easier. For many medieval women, being on your period made you unclean. That meant no communion, no touching sacred objects, and no entering certain parts of the church. Depending on the time and place, some women weren't even allowed to kneel during Mass if they were menstruating. It's all very chill. Historians still argue whether these restrictions were widely enforced or mostly symbolic. But one thing's clear, being on your period didn't just make you uncomfortable, it made you suspicious. You were considered leaky, unstable, and spiritually off balance. Some doctors, and we're using that term generously, believed that menstrual blood was a toxic substance released monthly to purge women's bodies of excess bile and emotion. If it didn't come out, that was worse. You might develop a condition known as suffocation of the womb, where your uterus supposedly wandered through your body looking for release. Symptoms included hysteria, fainting, and uncontrolled weeping. Basically, if you sneezed too dramatically, someone might blame your womb. And if you were pregnant, congrats, but that came with its own set of hygiene disasters. But we're not there yet. Right now, you're just trying to get through the day without bleeding onto your only gown. You've folded your rag into thirds, tucked it in, tied it with a scrap of twine, and are now praying it holds. You squirm on your stool, which is already starting to warm unpleasantly beneath you. And yet this is normal. Every woman you know has a routine. Some use moss, yes, moss for absorption. It's surprisingly soft, though not always effective. Others use bundles of raw wool. It sounds crazy, but it worked until it didn't. Wool shifted, bunched, and when improperly cleaned, caused infections no one could explain. You've heard whispered stories about women dying from the rot after inserting the wrong thing. But no one talks about it too loudly. You sip your morning broth and feel the dull cramp ripple through your abdomen. You shift your weight again and pull your cloak tighter around you. It doesn't help. Let's slip in a quick laugh. Why didn't medieval women complain about PMS? Because no one had the energy to listen, and they'd probably just prescribe a leech. Speaking of which, yes, leeches. Some medieval medical guides recommended bloodletting during menstruation to balance the humors, as if more blood loss was going to help. And if your cycle was irregular, that was even worse. You might be accused of being cursed, barren, or unnatural. Regularity was prized. Irregularity dangerous. There are documented cases of women seeking out traveling healers or wise women for herbal remedies. Some of the gentler ones involved teas made from mugwort or yarrow mildly effective, but others were more extreme, ingesting powdered lead, for instance, or smearing your thighs with toad oil. No one knew what worked. They just knew they didn't want to be out of sync with the moon. You step outside for a bit of air. The breeze hits your face, cooling the sweat on your brow, but offers no relief below. You feel your rag shifting again and quickly pinch your thighs together. The fear of public humiliation is real. One stain on your dress and gossip will follow you for weeks. Still, there's community in all this. You and the other women share knowing glances. You've seen each other shift awkwardly in church pews, walk stiffly down market lanes, and spend extra time squatting over chamber pots. You've even traded clean rags in emergencies, quietly, discreetly, sisterhood by blood. Now here's something wild. Some medieval midwives believed menstruation stopped during pregnancy because the womb redirected its blood to feed the child with purified milk. There's poetic charm in that, even if the biology is a bit off. But again, no one really knew. They just observed patterns and passed down stories. By midday, you're drained, literally. You've changed your cloth in secret, burned the used one under the bread oven to keep things discreet, and now you're counting the days. It might last 5 days. It might last 10. No one tracks these things on calendars. You just wait for the flow to slow, then stop. Until next month. As you squat to weed the garden, you feel it again, that soft warmth. You sigh. Of course. The rag has slipped again. You lean back against the rough wooden post of your doorway. Feet, dusty skirts, rumpled, and let out the kind of sigh that only someone who's just relieved themselves in a dim, stinking corner of the yard can truly appreciate. That's right, today we're talking about medieval bathrooms. Or rather, the stunning absence of them. No plumbing, no porcelain, no privacy. Just a wooden bench with a hole in it balanced over a pit you hope no one falls into. If you're living in a rural cottage, your toilet is either a shallow trench in the garden, a bucket in the corner of your one-room house, or if your family is truly fancy, a little outhouse with a door that barely latches. Either way, it's not glamorous. It's drafty, fly-ridden, and the stench, oh, you feel that in your bones. You probably relieve yourself 2 or 3 times a day, and each time it's a bit of a mental battle. What's the risk today? Splinters slipping on frozen waste in winter, falling in all together. Yes, that happened. There are recorded cases. You probably don't want to know. And toilet paper, please. You wish. What you've got is moss. or hay, maybe a smooth stone or rag depending on your budget and your bravery. Some noblewomen used bits of cloth that servants were expected to clean. Imagine that job posting. You wipe wince and try not to think about how much worse it's going to be if the moss you just used was in fact not moss. You finish your business, dump a bit of straw over the hole to keep the flies down, and hurry away. You don't linger. Nobody lingers. And that smell, you'll carry it with you all day, embedded in the hem of your dress and the memory of your nose. Now let's rewind a little, because castle life wasn't exactly cleaner. If you're a highborn lady, congratulations. You get to use the guardrobe, a long, narrow stone room built along the outer wall of the castle. There's a hole in the floor that drops directly into the moat below. Sound convenient? Sure, until you remember that medieval moats weren't filled with swans and poetry. They were filled with everything waste-rot, dead animals, and despair. So while you're perched on your cold stone seat, the updraft carries with it the breath of 1,000 unspoken regrets. There's a quirky little fringe fact for you. In some castles, clothes were hung inside the guardrobe. Why? Because it was so foul-smelling in there, lice and moths wouldn't go near it. Yes, the wardrobe hung in the toilet room on purpose. Garderobe literally means guard your robes, which, let's be honest, is a clever workaround and a disgusting one. You shift your weight as you remember this and feel the itchy seam of your shift press against your side. It's damp. Not from anything recent, you hope, but because humidity lingers in layers of unwashed fabric, especially in summer. You glance at the neighbor's latrine pit and note the flies dancing above it like it's a banquet. It is. Let's sneak in a joke while we're here. What did one medieval toilet say to the other? You stink of nobility. Wiping wasn't always guaranteed. In some areas, it was customary to do nothing at all. You'd just pull your shift back down and keep walking. People didn't expect clean, they expected not totally smeared. It was a sliding scale of dignity. And it gets worse. Diarrhea outbreaks were common, especially after festivals or warm months when water turned bad. Imagine an entire village struck down, all scrambling for the same shallow trench. No one's wiping. Everyone's praying. And the stench apocalyptic. Historians still argue whether certain towns had organized waste disposal or if they just let things accumulate until it became unbearable. Archaeological digs in London suggest that cesspits were occasionally cleaned out and covered with ash or straw, but often they were just left to stew for years. You make your way back indoors past the corner where your family keeps the chamber pot. It's ceramic, wide-brimmed, and never empty. Usually tucked beneath a bench or bed, it gets emptied in the morning, sometimes into the latrine pit, sometimes out the window, into the street. With a hearty shout of Gardaloo translation, watch out if you're courteous. If you're not well, people learn quickly to hug the walls. Now here's a sensory treat. It's midsummer. The windows are small. The air doesn't move. Your family of 7 has all used the same pot. And you're trying to eat. There are flies everywhere. You swat at one with your spoon. You vaguely remember something your grandmother once said. Sweet herbs in the windows keep the stench out. You've tried that. But no amount of rosemary, lavender, or mint can mask the underlying bouquet of human waste, sweat, and decaying meat. Let's talk about bathing for a moment. Because it would help. But it's complicated. Some towns had public bathhouses, especially in earlier medieval centuries. These were steamy wooden huts with large communal tubs. Women bathed together, scrubbing each other with cloths and chatting about market prices or marriage prospects. But as time went on, especially post-Black Death, public baths became suspect linked to immorality disease and French vice. So they were closed, and the filth predictably followed. Bathing privately wasn't easy either. Heating that much water took hours, and hauling it to a tub, if you even owned one, was a job for several people. So instead, most people just washed their hands and faces, maybe their feet. The rest left to fate and fabric. Quick side note, in some wealthier households, foot washing was a whole event. Guests were offered basins of warm scented water. But it wasn't about hygiene, it was a show of hospitality. A perfumed ankle didn't mean a clean body, just clean ankles. Back to the toilet situation. You're starting to get the sense that there's no good option. There's just less bad. You might use a communal latrine shared by a dozen families. You might go in the woods. Or you might, in the middle of the night, squat over the floor and hope the dog doesn't walk through it before morning. You glance at your hands. You've touched the latrine door, the chamber pot lid, the comb from earlier. And what haven't you touched? Water, soap, anything remotely sanitizing. You wipe your palms on your apron and call it a win. By now, you've resigned yourself to the eternal cling of grime. It's in your fingernails, under your arms, crusted along your hairline. But today's challenge isn't your skin, it's your clothes. And let's be honest, they're not so much clothes as they are a second skin made of wool, sweat, and old stew spills. You tug at your kirtle stiff with dried soap and something that smells suspiciously like fermented cabbage and try not to gag. Laundry day is here, and it's going to be long. In the medieval world, washing your clothes wasn't just a chore, it was an ordeal. First, you needed water, lots of it, and it had to be carried from a stream, river, or communal well. Buckets sloshed against your legs as you trudged back and forth, arms aching, trying not to spill too much. Depending on where you lived, this alone could take hours. You drop your bundle near the communal washstone and roll up your sleeves. The soap homemade. It's a grayish lump of animal fat mixed with wood ash, lumpy caustic, and deeply unpleasant. It stings if you've got cuts on your hands. And you do, you always do. You slap the fabric down onto the stone and begin the rhythm. Scrub, rinse, wring. Scrub, rinse, wring. Again and again. Your back aches. Your fingers go numb. The water turns cloudy with dirt dye and mystery substances that no one asks about. Let's sneak in a quick joke before the soap fumes kick in. Why did the medieval woman never fold her laundry? Because it never got dry. Drying clothes was its own adventure. You couldn't just toss them in the sun. For one, it wasn't always sunny. And two, letting your shift flap openly in public could be scandalous. Some towns had designated women's fields for drying clothes, open spaces where undergarments could be hung without too many raised eyebrows. But in small villages, you made do. Draped things over bushes, laid them on flat stones, tucked them into window frames. And if it rained, tough luck. You'd be wearing damp wool for the next 2 days, praying your armpits didn't start growing something. Now let's talk underclothes. You're wearing a linen shift beneath your outer gown. It's your only real layer of protection from the wool. And it's supposed to be washable, though you've only got 2, maybe 1 if you're poor. So when it starts to yellow smell or stiffen from sweat and body oil, you just try to ignore it. Historians still argue whether medieval women wore anything like underwear as we know it. Some manuscripts show linen drawers, especially for the upper classes, but others suggest most women simply went without. Easier to squat that way. More breathable, too. But in terms of hygiene, you can guess. Your outer gown hasn't been properly washed in months, maybe longer. It's too heavy, too delicate, or too expensive to risk ruining in the wash. Instead, you spot clean it. Dab the stains. Air it out. Sometimes sprinkle herbs on it and hope no one sniffs too closely. A quirky fringe detail for you in some places, women rubbed bread crusts or stale cake into grease stains to soak up oils. Not the worst idea, but also not great when the dog keeps trying to eat your clothes afterward. You glance at your neighbor, who's elbow deep in suds muttering a prayer to Saint Hunna, the patron saint of washerwomen. She's scrubbing what might once have been a bonnet. Now it looks more like a napkin that lost a bar fight. Still, you nod respectfully. This is holy work in its way. The soap makes your knuckles crack. You wince and blow on your fingers already raw. You think back to a story you once heard a noblewoman who had servants to wash her garments in rosewater. Rosewater, you barely have stream water, and yours smells faintly of frog. Let's not forget the seasonal torture. In winter, the water is icy. Your hands go blue, your skin splits, and you cry silently while scrubbing a shift that's frozen to the basin. In summer, it's the opposite, steamy, sweaty, fly-infested. The soap melts before you can use it, and you risk heat stroke just trying to rinse a sock. You wring out your shift and drape it on a flat rock, watching as the water runs down into the soil, brown and full of suds. You pray it dries quickly. You've got exactly one other shift and it's still damp from yesterday's rain. Tonight's going to be a gamble. And then comes the final indignity ironing, or rather, the lack of it. You don't iron clothes. You press them flat under mattresses, weigh them down with stones, or simply accept that you'll be walking around in rumpled, creased wool for eternity. Only the wealthiest had smoothing stones or heavy glass slickers to press garments. You're lucky if your dress doesn't smell like goat by noon. Let's take a quick breath and enjoy this fringe fact. In some parts of Scandinavia, women used fermented urine to bleach linen. That's right, fermented. Urine. The ammonia helped whiten the cloth, and while the smell was legendary, it got results. So next time someone compliments your pale shift, you can smile and say, "Thanks, it's soaked in pee." You gather your now wet clothes into a lumpy pile and begin the hike home. Everything drips. Your arms ache. Your back screams. But you know what's coming, hanging the laundry by the hearth, hoping embers don't catch your only undergarments on fire. Again. And the kicker. Tomorrow, it'll all be dirty again. You'll spill broth on your apron, lean against a soot-covered doorframe, or get peed on by the baby you're minding for a neighbor. Laundry in the medieval world isn't about getting clean. It's about survival. Keeping the grime just below scandalous levels. You hang your shift near the fire, turn it occasionally, and try not to think about the smell. You'll sleep in your second shift tonight, the one with the patched armpits and the faint scent of garlic. It's not ideal, but it's dry. And in this world, that's a luxury. You wake up feeling like you've slept in a bowl of stew. And honestly, you kind of have. Your linen shift is damp again, not with sweat exactly, but with that mysterious mix of condensation, body heat, and something you're hoping is just last night's foot salve. You stretch, yawn, and notice it, the greasy sheen on your skin, the dust caked in your elbow, the crust forming at the corner of your mouth. Ah yes, time for the medieval version of morning skincare. Spoiler alert, it's going to be rough. Your bathroom is a pewter basin of cold water on a wooden stool, maybe a chipped bit of polished metal you use as a mirror. You splash your face with the water, no soap, just water, and rub it in with your fingertips. It's brisk. It's invigorating. It's probably contaminated with yesterday's dirt, but let's not get picky. You don't have face wash. You don't have moisturizer. You have lard. Literally, animal fat may be mixed with beeswax or herbs if someone was feeling generous. Rich women might have had scented balms, rosewater almond oil, maybe a hint of myrrh. But you rub a little duck grease onto your cheeks, not to nourish the skin, but to stop it from cracking in the wind. And it works. Sort of. Until it clogs your pores and you end up with what medieval healers called milk boils. The treatment: a poultice of crushed snails and clay. You tried that once. The snails were not crushed. You never tried again. Let's get a quirky fringe detail in here. Some 14th century beauty manuals recommend rinsing the face with young boys' urine to preserve youth. Yep, that was an actual skincare tip. Historians still argue whether this was widespread practice or just one particularly strange scribe with a twisted sense of humor. Either way, you are not interested in testing that one. Instead, you try your usual routine: a bit of vinegar dabbed on the cheeks to tighten the skin, it stings, followed by a dusting of flour or ground bone powder to reduce shine. You check your reflection, your nose is red, your chin has a rash, and there's a little suspicious bump near your ear. Probably a flea bite, or maybe a plague blister. Who knows? Speaking of skin issues, let's talk acne, or rather impurities of the blood. That's how most medieval people understood skin problems. You didn't get pimples because of oil or hormones, you got them because your humors were unbalanced. Too much bile, not enough phlegm, or maybe your spleen was angry again. Treatments included leeches, always herbal tonics, rare, and fasting, which never helped, but made everyone feel pious. You scratch at your shoulder where a patch of eczema is starting to blister. You'll try some pig fat and ash later. Or maybe just ignore it and hope it goes away. That's the medieval way. Let's get you laughing before you cry. What's a medieval woman's favorite skincare routine? Step 1. Ignore it. Step 2. Die early. You step outside into the early morning air, hoping for some freshness. Instead, you get smoke. The neighbors are already burning meat scraps, and the wind carries the scent straight into your pores. Great. Now you're smoked like a ham. Now let's move to your hands. They're your most visible feature, calloused, dry, usually stained from herbs or dirt. You might soak them in warm water at night if you're lucky. Maybe rub a little goose fat on the knuckles. If you're preparing food or weaving, your hands are in constant motion, constantly irritated. And heaven help you if you get a splinter or a cut. Infection is practically guaranteed. In richer households, women sometimes wore gloves at night, slathered in oil or wax to soften the skin. Sounds nice, right? But gloves were also a status symbol. Pale, smooth hands meant you didn't work. Your hands rough as a turnip, permanently gray around the nails. You rub them on your apron and move on. There's no deodorant. No toothpaste, no facial cleanser. Just you, your sweat glands, and a medieval sense of tolerance. People smelled like people. And by people, we mean sour milk and onions. You might chew a mint leaf now and then, or rinse your mouth with wine if you're bougie. But mostly, you just live with it. Which brings us to body odor. Let's be honest, it's everywhere. You smell like sweat. Your neighbor smells like feet, and the baker smells like yeast and goat. It's fine. Social norms adjust. People masked scents with herbs, tucking rosemary into their sleeves, wearing sachets of dried lavender, or rubbing sage under their arms. But those were temporary fixes. At best, you smelled like sweaty herbs. You glance over at your friend, who's rubbing crushed chamomile into her armpits with a stick. She swears it works. You try it later and discover that it just makes your sweat smell faintly floral. Progress. Historians still argue how often medieval women actually bathed. Some records suggest noble women bathed every few weeks. Others say peasants might wash their whole body only a few times a year. But local customs varied. In parts of Italy, for instance, bathhouses were popular until the plague hit. Then people got suspicious. They thought bathing opened the pores, making you more vulnerable to disease. So washing became dangerous. You lean over your basin and rinse your face again. The water's already lukewarm. You rub a corner of your shift across your forehead and call it done. Good enough. You're clean. For now. Now here's a final quirky tip before the day begins. There's a 15th century manual that recommends mixing rosewater, crushed pearls, and powdered deer horn into a paste for eternal youth. You don't have any pearls. You definitely don't have a deer horn. But the fantasy is nice. So you rub a little mint on your neck and pretend you're radiant. Because in the medieval world, hygiene wasn't about perfection. It was about passing. Passing as clean, passing as respectable, passing as someone who hadn't just slept in a stew of your own making. And with that, you toss on your cloak, grab your basket, and head to market. Cheeks slightly greasy hair pinned back with a bone needle and a tiny piece of dried mint leaf clinging to your chin. Gorgeous. You're standing in a crowded market square, hem-brushing muck nostrils flaring against the scent of warm fish and horse dung. But your focus isn't the butcher's stall or the tinker's cart. It's your head, specifically the sudden, unmistakable itching just behind your ear. You scratch casually at first. No big deal. Maybe a stray hair or a speck of dust. But then the itch spreads down the nape of your neck across your scalp like tiny marching feet. You freeze. You know exactly what this means. Lice again. In the medieval world, parasites are just part of the package deal. Lice, fleas, mites, everyone has them. Even queens, even priests. No one is exempt. You duck behind a stall and start checking. You lift your coif, a linen cap meant to keep hair neat and relatively clean, and scratch harder. Yep, they're back. Your hair, never truly clean to begin with, is now a battleground. The thick braid you've so carefully wrapped and pinned smells faintly of old oil and dried rosemary. And inside that twist, a lice metropolis. Eggs, nits clinging to the strands like beads, and the adults, oh, they're crawling. Here's a fringe fact to get under your skin. Literally, some women believed that wearing garlic oil on the scalp would repel lice. Others used ashes mixed with goose fat. It sort of worked. Mostly it just made you smell like greasy campfire soup. Effective marginally, attractive absolutely not. You shuffle home itchy and annoyed, already planning your lice routine. It involves sitting by the hearth, unraveling your braid, and letting your sister comb through your hair with a fine-toothed iron comb, one of your most treasured tools. It cost 3 eggs and a prayer at the last fair. But first, let's pause for a laugh. Why did the medieval woman stop brushing her hair? Because it kept biting back. You settle by the fire, grip your knees, and tilt your head forward. Your sister mutters as she parts your hair, inspecting each section with the grim seriousness of someone reading a will. She clicks her tongue and starts scraping. The comb pulls hard. It drags tiny bodies and knits from your scalp, each pass ending with a little flick into the embers. Sizzle. Crackle. Satisfaction. Still, it hurts. Your scalp throbs. Tears spring to your eyes. You bite your lip and try to focus on the warmth of the fire. The shame isn't in having lice, it's in letting them win. Historians still argue whether medieval people saw lice as inevitable or preventable. In poorer areas, it was simply accepted. You could try oil vinegar or even shaving your head entirely, but that wasn't always practical or socially acceptable. In religious communities, tonsure, the shaving of the crown, helped with pest control. But for most women, long hair was expected, and lice came with the territory. Fleas, meanwhile, were sneakier. They hid in straw bedding, fur-lined cloaks, and floor rushes. You could be walking through a church one moment and scratching your thighs the next. Flea bites were common and sometimes dangerous. After all, this is the age of plague. You just never know which flea might be carrying something extra. You throw your coif into the pot to boil, then tug off your shift and inspect the neckline. More tiny eggs. You groan. Time to rewash it again. This time with stronger lye soap and maybe some juniper if you can spare it. A neighbor once told you that soaking your clothes in wine would kill lice. You tried it. All it did was waste wine. And now you can't drink red without thinking of dead bugs. Let's talk bedding, your true enemy. You share your straw mattress with your younger cousin, a dog, and at least 2 types of bug. Every few weeks, you dump the straw and replace it with new stuffing. Maybe hay, maybe moss, maybe shredded cloth if you're lucky. But it doesn't matter. The fleas always return. There's a little medieval superstition you half believe: sprinkle ground wormwood in your bedding to drive out pests. It smells awful, but hey, it's worth a shot. Some women also placed lavender or pennyroyal between the sheets. Others just burned the whole bed and started over. You're not there yet. Let's squeeze in another itch-inducing detail: body lice. These delightful creatures live in your clothing, not your hair. They nest in the seams, lay eggs in folds, and only come out when you're wearing the garment. Which is, of course, always. That strange crawling sensation under your armpit at midday. That wasn't imagination. You reach for your smock, sniff it, and frown. It smells like lye and old tallow. Good enough. You put it back on and hope the lice take the night off. Now let's get to the more speculative stuff: pubic lice, charmingly nicknamed crabs. Medical texts from the time are squeamish about them, but they existed. You've heard whispers of downstairs itching, especially among women who shared bedding with traveling workers. Remedies ranged from shaving risky to sulfur pastes, more risky, to prayer ineffective but popular. One odd tidbit: a few manuscripts suggest using mashed leeks and vinegar as a poultice for crotch itch. Whether this worked or just made you smell like a salad, no one's sure. But in desperate times, even a salad poultice starts to sound reasonable. You light a bit of sage and waft the smoke over your hair. Not because it kills lice, it doesn't, but because it makes you feel like you're doing something. And sometimes that's all you can do. Just keep scraping, keep boiling, keep hoping. Your sister plucks one last knit from your hair and sighs. You're good. For now. And that's the mantra. For now. You bundle your comb, rinse your hands, and lie down on your scratchy mattress, fully aware that by morning, the cycle may begin again. Because in the medieval world, lice are less a pest and more of a permanent roommate, uninvited, unkillable, unimpressed by your hygiene rituals. You pull the blanket up to your chin, scratch one last time behind your ear, and close your eyes. Sleep tight. Don't let you trudge into the hearth-warmed kitchen, the lingering itch behind your ear now matched by a stubborn tickle in your throat. It's early, but the day's chores won't wait, especially when you're juggling the care of children cooking and that never-ending parade of washing and tending. But today your focus shifts to something a bit more delicate, your teeth. Yes, those little enamel warriors that medieval women surprisingly didn't entirely neglect, even if their brushing methods were, well, creative. You reach for your rudimentary toothbrush, a twig from a frayed branch, chewed at one end to form a primitive brush. The flavor, think bark a bit bitter and slightly dusty. No toothpaste here. If anything, you rub some crushed mint leaves or powdered charcoal into your makeshift brush. The goal isn't minty freshness, but scouring off the buildup of food plaque and the occasional bit of grit that found its way in during meals. Dental hygiene was patchy in medieval times. The wealthy might have used toothpicks fashioned from precious metals or rinsed their mouths with wine or vinegar, while the rest relied on herbal rinses. Clove sage and rosemary were popular, touted for their antiseptic properties. Sometimes you chew a sprig of parsley to freshen your breath, though it tastes more like grass than candy. But let's be real. A medieval diet was not kind to teeth. Lots of coarse bread, tough meat, and thanks to sugar imported from faraway lands, sticky sweets for the privileged. Cavities and tooth decay were rampant. You've already lost a couple of molars and have a tender spot on your left gum that throbs when you eat. Here's a fun fringe fact. Some medieval people believed that brushing with crushed oyster shells could help whiten teeth. You try not to imagine the gritty crunch on your gums, but it does make you wonder if they were just trying to exfoliate. As you finish your scrubbing, you spit into a corner of the hearth, hoping to keep the floor clean. There's no running water to rinse your mouth thoroughly. Instead, you use a cup of well water to swish, grimacing at the taste. Historians still argue how widespread teeth cleaning actually was among common folk. Some records suggest it was a daily ritual, others imply it was a rare luxury. What's clear, though, is that dental pain was common enough that herbal remedies and even tooth extraction were frequent treatments. You dread the day your tooth starts to wiggle. Speaking of teeth, you've noticed that medieval women had surprisingly varied attitudes towards oral hygiene. Some believed that bad breath was a sign of moral failing, something you could fix with virtue prayer and a splash of rosewater. Others embraced the natural smells of their bodies, considering them a sign of life and health. Now about those gums, gum disease was rampant. You rub a little sage poultice on your swollen gums, hoping to stave off bleeding. It works a bit, though the taste is intense. A quick joke to lighten the mood. Why didn't medieval women ever need toothpaste commercials? Because their breath scared everyone away already. Moving on from your mouth, let's think about hair care. You never wash your hair with plain water alone, it's too harsh. Instead, you use a mixture of vinegar and herbs to rinse and condition your locks. Rosemary is your favorite. It's supposed to strengthen hair and keep scalp infections at bay. There's also the infamous medieval practice of masking the hair with fats and oils. You've heard of noblewomen using expensive almond or lavender oils. You use whatever grease is left from cooking, sometimes mixed with crushed herbs. The scent is earthy. Historians still argue whether medieval women washed their hair regularly or let it go for months at a time. Some chroniclers say hair was only washed a few times a year. Others claim weekly washes were the norm among the upper classes. You're somewhere in the middle trying to balance cleanliness with practicality. You finger through your hair now loosely braided to keep it tidy during the day. The strands are a bit greasy, a bit tangled, and definitely home to a few unwelcome hitchhikers. You sigh and resolve to inspect again tonight. Finally, you turn your attention to your nails. They're short and stubby from all the manual work dirt embedded under the edges. You pick at them with a small knife, trying to keep them clean enough to avoid infection, but not so long that they break. In wealthier households, women might have polished their nails with crushed gemstones or tinted them with herbal dyes. You have none of that luxury. Your nails are purely functional tools in your daily labor. In some, medieval hygiene habits are less about pampering and more about surviving. You clean what you can, when you can, with what you have. And sometimes that just means making peace with the dirt and grime until the next chance to scrub comes along. As you prepare to head out for the day's errands, you catch your reflection in a polished cooking pot. Your face is smeared with soot and sweat, your hair tousled, your hands stained. You smile faintly, because in this world, that's as good as it gets. You're trudging through the muddy streets when suddenly you notice a familiar, less than pleasant sensation. A dampness that's been slowly creeping down your legs all morning. Not from rain, not from spilled ale. No, it's something much more intimate, the daily ongoing challenge of medieval menstruation. Let's be honest, menstrual hygiene in medieval times was less about convenience and more about necessity, ingenuity, and sometimes sheer endurance. You didn't have sanitary pads or tampons. Instead, you relied on rags, moss, even shredded cloth, all carefully folded and tucked into your undergarments or bound with strips of linen. These were washed if you were lucky or replaced when they became too unbearable. The smell. Oh yes, the medieval menstrual bouquet is an unspoken companion to every woman. No perfumes or deodorants could mask it entirely. You try to be discreet, but the dampness and occasional staining make that tricky. Historians still argue how often medieval women changed their menstrual cloths and how widespread the use of certain absorbent materials really was. Some suggest that many women simply bled through their clothing and only washed when the weather allowed. You shudder at the thought. You remember a quirky fact: some women used a mixture of alum and vinegar to reduce odor and bleeding. Alum, a natural mineral salt, was thought to have astringent properties. You tried it once and it burned like fire, but hey, you survived. Managing menstruation is a full-time job. You limit physical labor during your period, taking rest when you can, though societal expectations often require you to keep going. The Church's stance on menstruation was complex. It was seen as a form of impurity, but not a sin. This created a strange tension, where you were expected to be modest and reserved during that time, but not to stop living entirely. Menstrual taboos abound. You avoid entering the church or touching holy items during your period, and you know better than to offer food or drink to anyone, especially children, while bleeding. There's a mix of fear and respect wrapped up in these customs. In terms of bathing, most medieval women didn't bathe during menstruation, believing it could cause illness or disrupt the humors further. You adhere to this advice, rinsing only your hands and face, avoiding full-body immersion until your cycle ends. You remember your mother's stories about how some women slept with a special herbal sachet beneath their pillow to ease cramps. Yarrow, chamomile, and rue were common choices. You clutch your own bundle now, feeling its rough texture and the faint scent of lavender. Let's lighten the mood. Why don't medieval women ever play hide and seek? Because good luck hiding when you're trying to conceal a blood-stained shift in public. The physical discomfort is one thing, but the social implications weigh heavier. You can't wear your best clothes. Your movements are guarded. You become hyper-aware of every stain, every scent, every drip, and the fear of leaking in public ever present. Despite all this, women found strength and solidarity. You and your friends share advice in whispers, trading tips on managing the curse. You even make jokes, dark, sarcastic ones that help carry you through. And then there's childbirth, often tied closely to menstruation in medical texts. Menstrual blood was thought to cleanse the body before conception, and irregular periods could be blamed for infertility. You know women who consult midwives or local healers, desperate for remedies to balance their humors and restore regularity. You consider the elaborate rituals some women undertake during their cycles. Some light candles, others fast or abstain from certain foods, all in hopes of appeasing unseen forces that govern the body. At day's end, you carefully wash your cloths in a nearby stream, scrubbing out stains and rinsing away the day's burdens. You dry them on a bush and hope the wind carries away any lingering scent. The medieval menstrual experience is far from glamorous, but it's life. Raw, unvarnished, and utterly human. You tug your cloak tighter, feeling the weight of history and the steady pulse of your own resilience. The church bell tolls softly in the distance as you enter your small, dimly lit chamber. The faint scent of beeswax candles mixes with the lingering musk of old wool and drying herbs. Today you decide to turn your attention to another intimate, if often overlooked aspect of medieval hygiene, the care of your feet. Your feet have been trudging through mud, straw, and horse manure all day, thankfully wrapped in simple leather shoes, often a bit too tight, always a bit too dusty. You kick off the shoes and wiggle your toes, relishing the cool air brushing against your skin. But there's no denying the problem. Your feet are grimy, cracked, and prone to infections. Foot care in medieval times was practical but rudimentary. You soak your feet in a basin filled with warm water infused with herbs like rosemary, sage, or chamomile plucked fresh from your garden or bartered at the market. The water steams fragrant and soothing as you slowly scrub the dirt away using a rough cloth or a homemade brush fashioned from animal hair. Sometimes you rub in a mixture of animal fat and beeswax, hoping it will soften the tough skin and protect against the cold nights. It's not a spa day by any means, but it's a welcome relief. There's a quirky historical tidbit here. Some medieval women believed that burying their feet in damp earth or mud could cure tiredness and improve circulation. You haven't tried it yourself, no offense to the soil, but the thought of squelching mud between your toes during a church service makes you chuckle. The bigger problem, fungal infections like athlete's foot, damp closed shoes worn for days on end, created the perfect breeding ground for itchy, painful rashes. You rub your feet with vinegar or even urine. Yes, urine. It sounds gross, but the ammonia helps kill bacteria. Medical texts of the time recommend it, though. Most women prefer the herb options. Historians still argue how common foot ailments were among the general population. While some suggest that the poor suffered more due to lack of footwear, others argue that even the wealthiest had their share of foot problems thanks to tight shoes and long hours standing. You carefully clip your nails with a small sharpened bone tool, mindful of not cutting too close. Dirty, ragged nails invite infection, and quite frankly, don't look good when you're trying to impress the village blacksmith. Speaking of appearances, some noblewomen painted their toenails with tinted herbal dyes, beet juice for a rosy pink, walnut husk for brown shades. You've heard stories of ladies painting their nails red to attract suitors. You chuckle imagining yourself smearing beetroot on your toes in the middle of the barn. Now about smell. Feet are infamous for it. You sprinkle a little crushed rosemary or lavender in your shoes to combat odor. Others use dried mint leaves or thyme. And when all else fails, you air out your footwear under the sun. It's a small luxury to feel the warmth soak into the leather and chase away the damp. Your feet ache, but you remind yourself that they carry you through each day's trials, from fetching water to tending crops, from weaving to chasing mischievous children. A little joke for the road. Why did the medieval woman bring her feet to church? Because they had a soul connection to the divine. You rise from your soaking basin, pat your feet dry with a worn cloth, and slide back into your shoes. They're stiff and unforgiving, but familiar, like an old friend who doesn't complain. As you settle under your woolen blanket later that night, you flex your toes, grateful for this small moment of care. The roughness, the dirt, the smells, they're all part of the story. A story of endurance, resourcefulness, and the strange beauty of everyday survival. And just as your eyelids flutter closed, you feel a gentle tingling, a reminder that even in the darkest, dirtiest corners of medieval life, there is comfort in the rituals of care we carve out for ourselves. You wake to the faint chirping of birds outside your window, the morning chill still clinging to the air. Today, your thoughts turn toward the most personal of hygiene rituals in the medieval era: bathing, or more accurately, the sporadic and often fraught act of cleansing your entire body. Contrary to modern assumptions, medieval women did bathe, but not nearly as often or as thoroughly as you might imagine. Full-body baths were a luxury reserved for the wealthy, and even then they were infrequent. For most, bathing was a quick sponge down, a face wash, or a delicate wash of the hands and feet. The prevailing belief in the humoral system that the body's health depended on balancing 4 bodily fluids meant that excessive bathing could disrupt this balance, leading to illness. You've heard more than one elder warn that hot baths open the pores to harmful spirits or disease, so your bathing schedule is cautious. When you do bathe, it's usually in a wooden tub filled with hot water heated over the fire. Sometimes you add herbs, lavender for calm, rosemary for strength, and chamomile to soothe the skin. The scent of these plants mingles with the warmth wrapping around you like a comforting cloak. But let's be honest, the water is often murky, reused by family members throughout the day, and the temperature uneven. You lower yourself carefully, relishing the warmth, but wary of lingering grime and the prickling of bug bites hidden beneath your skin. There's a quirky tidbit here. Some women added crushed nettles to their bath water, believing the sting of the plant would toughen the skin and ward off disease. You're tempted, but cautious nettles are known for their burn. Historians still argue whether the decline in frequent bathing during the late medieval period was due to changing religious attitudes, fear of waterborne diseases, or simple practicality. The Black Death and other plagues certainly made people wary of public bathhouses, once hubs of hygiene and socializing. Speaking of public bathhouses, you've heard stories from traveling merchants about these communal spaces where women could bathe, gossip, and escape daily drudgery. But with rising moral scrutiny and fears about sin and scandal, many were shuttered or fell out of favor by your time. Instead, you make do with sponge baths, washing your face, neck, and underarms with vinegar, and water scrubbing with cloths or brushes to remove sweat and dirt. You use lye soap, sparingly aware that it can irritate the skin. Let's lighten the mood with a medieval joke. Why don't medieval women ever play hide and seek in bathhouses? because everyone knows where the dirty secrets are. After bathing, you wrap yourself in a coarse linen shift, letting your skin air dry in the chilly room. The chill is uncomfortable, but damp skin invites infection. Your hair, as usual, remains only partially washed. A full wash and braid could take hours, luxuries you don't have. Instead, you use herbal rinses to freshen your scalp and mask odors. You think of your grandmother's advice, cleanliness is next to godliness, but don't get too clean or you'll wash away your soul. It's a curious mix of faith and superstition that guides much of your hygiene routine. Moving down, you focus on your hands scrubbing the dirt from beneath your fingernails and smoothing the rough skin. Your hands tell stories of labor and love, and even if they're far from soft, they are yours. Despite all the challenges, you find solace in these moments of care. Bathing is not just about cleanliness, but reclaiming your body, however briefly, from the dirt and hardship of daily life. And as you step out of the tub, the warmth fading, but your spirit lifted you. Smile knowing that even in the toughest times, a little self-care can be a quiet act of rebellion. You pull your cloak tighter as the chill of evening creeps in, and your thoughts drift towards something more subtle but no less essential, the care of your clothing, and by extension, your body odor. After all, in a world without deodorant or washing machines, how did medieval women manage to keep their garments from becoming walking biohazards? Your linen shifts and woolen dresses are your second skin worn day after day. You wash them when you can. Usually in cold or lukewarm water, often in a nearby stream or communal washhouse. Soap is precious and made from animal fat and ash, so you use it sparingly, scrubbing the collar's cuffs and underarms where grime and sweat gather most. Between washes, you hang your clothes out to air, hoping the sun and breeze will kill some of the stink. You might sprinkle a little lavender or rosemary into your wardrobe, but the scent is faint against the weight of everyday odors. A quirky fact, some medieval women carried small sachets of herbs or flowers in their pockets, or tucked inside their bodices to mask body odor. These posies were thought to protect against disease as well as unpleasant smells. You often sniff your own posy, its faint floral scent a welcome relief amid the day's grime. Historians still argue how much medieval people truly understood about body odor and hygiene. Some chroniclers suggest that smells were just part of life accepted and ignored, while others indicate that cleanliness and pleasant scents were markers of social status and moral virtue. Your hair is another story. Braids, twists, and coiled buns help keep stray hairs from mingling with dirt and sweat. You use a mixture of herbs and animal fat to condition your scalp and tame frizz. The scent is earthy but comforting. Now the sweat itself, you notice that after a long day of labor, your skin feels sticky, your armpits damp. Without deodorant, this was a fact of life. You sometimes rub a little alum or crushed mint under your arms, hoping to reduce odor and moisture. Clothing stains are inevitable, mud-blood food spills, and you treat them with a mix of herbal pastes and vinegar. There's an old wives' tale that soaking garments in urine helps whiten them, but you've yet to muster the courage to try it yourself. Joke time. Why did the medieval woman carry a bouquet to keep from smelling like one? You also take care to wash your undergarments separately, if you own more than one, since these come into closest contact with your skin. You know that germs and lice love dirty linen, and you want to avoid infestations. Speaking of lice, they are a constant nuisance. You inspect your hair and clothes regularly, using fine-toothed combs to hunt and remove them. Sometimes you burn infested clothing or bedding to prevent outbreaks. Your nighttime ritual includes changing into fresh shifts when possible, drying your hair as best you can, and resting in clean bedding, a rare luxury. You breathe in the faint scents of lavender and rosemary that linger soothing your tired senses. All in all, medieval clothing care is a delicate dance between necessity, superstition, and available resources. It's less about fashion and more about survival comfort, and sometimes a dash of pride. As you prepare to sleep, you smile at the thought that despite the odors, stains, and occasional infestations, you and your fellow medieval women have carved out your own versions of dignity amid the dirt. The night deepens around you, and you find yourself reflecting on one last aspect of medieval hygiene that's both fascinating and a little unsettling. The communal use of linens and the occasional sharing of personal grooming tools. You never imagined that something as private as your comb or towel could be passed around. But in your village, resources are scarce and survival means sharing what little you have. You recall the time your neighbor borrowed your comb to tame her wild hair before the festival. The wooden teeth were smooth, but worn from years of use. You wince a little now, wondering what else might have lingered on it, lice dandruff, or even something more mysterious. Medieval women often shared towels, cloths, and combs among family members or close friends. Personal hygiene items were precious and expensive, and most households had only a few. This practice likely contributed to the spread of skin conditions, lice, and other parasites. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some people believed that sharing grooming tools could transfer good fortune or health from one person to another, a bit like passing a lucky charm. You like that idea even if it doesn't make up for the itching. Historians still argue whether such sharing was a necessity born of poverty or a culturally accepted norm. Some suggest that in crowded living conditions, personal space and belongings were simply less rigidly defined than today. Your thoughts turn to communal baths, again long gone now, but once places of socializing and hygiene. Without them, you rely on close-knit networks of women exchanging advice, herbal remedies, and even clean cloths to manage everyday grime and illness. You remember stories of midwives and wise women who carried their own sets of tools, needles, knives, herbs, and the trust required to share these intimate items. Hygiene was as much about relationships as cleanliness. As you lay back on your straw-stuffed mattress, your skin still faintly scented with lavender and rosemary, you consider the resilience woven into these shared experiences. Despite the challenges, dirt, and discomforts, medieval women forged bonds and survival strategies rooted in community. The faint rustle of straw, the distant howl of a dog, and the soft hum of the night create a lullaby. You feel connected to countless women before you each navigating the same messy, wonderful human experience. A final joke to ease your mind. Why didn't medieval women ever need social media? Because they shared everything, even their lice. Now as your eyes close and the world softens into shadows, remember hygiene in medieval times was a patchwork of necessity, belief, and resourcefulness. And while the smells and grime might make you shudder, the courage and creativity behind it all are truly something to admire. Sleep well knowing you've traveled through time, walked in their shoes, and emerged wiser, and maybe a little cleaner than before. Word count 173, 300-word wind down. The night wraps itself gently around you like a soft, worn quilt. The day's stories of dirt, sweat, and survival begin to settle into a quiet rhythm, slowing your thoughts and softening the edges of discomfort. Imagine the cool night air brushing lightly against your skin, carrying away the heaviness of the day. The lingering scents of lavender, rosemary, and a hint of smoke fade into a gentle, calming hush. Though the tales of medieval hygiene might have made you cringe or laugh, remember that these were lives lived fully imperfect, resilient, and fiercely human. The grit and grime you've walked through are part of a larger story about adapting, enduring, and finding comfort in small acts of care. Close your eyes and picture a simple wooden house, a warm hearth glowing softly in the dark, and a woman much like you tending to her hair, her skin, and her weary feet. The noises of a bustling medieval village fade away as you drift further into peace. The dirt will be there tomorrow, but for now let yourself rest, knowing you've journeyed through history with open eyes and an open heart. Sweet dreams, and may the hum of the fan or the soft night breeze carry you gently into a restful sleep. End of script. Sweet dreams.